Alright, so welcome to week 3 of the 30-day scripting challenge, or day 15 to be exact. So far, weeks 1 and 2 have been kinda easy, but now weeks 3 and 4 are going to be where things will take off. We're going to go into a lot more advanced topics, but don't worry, because day 15 is very light. We're keeping it super simple with data store saving. Now, I was debating between using Roblox's default data store service, a third-party thing called Profile Store, and then Google's Firebase. Now, if you don't know what Google's Firebase is, don't worry about it, because I've not decided to go with that. It's a really nice way to store data, but I'm not going to be using that because I think it's going to be a little bit too complicated. So we're going to go with Profile Store. It's super easy to use, and I love Profile Store. So pretty much all I've done is I've added the Profile Store module into the module script. I'll leave this in the description for anyone who wants to follow along with the video or just use it for themselves. And then we're going to make a module script inside of our services here. And I'll also leave a link to this plugin here in the description. This is the template, the script template thing that I was talking about previously. It makes setting up scripts really easy. In this case, I have a template for Profile Store here, and then I also have one for service. So I'll click on service, and then it automatically sets it up. And then I also have a plugin to rename it. So in this case, we're gonna call this data service here, and then it automatically renames it for me. And pretty much, I don't think I'm gonna actually use the traditional service template here, because this is more or less like this is kind of like a helper. So I'd probably put it in a modules instead of inside services. So I'd probably name it to like data controller or something. And I wouldn't even use Internet or Star either, you know. It's gonna be a thing that'll connect to Profile Store data saving a little easier. Utilizing Profile Store. So anyways, to start, we're first going to grab the Profile Store. Actually, I think I'm just gonna rename this to Profile module. So anyways, let's grab our Profile Store at the top here. So actually I can just do this and it will get us Profile Store. We don't even need replicated storage. So I can just delete. I don't think we're going to use replicated storage at all in this, so I'm not going to keep the variable there. And then we're also going to grab the players here. And then also we're going to put in run service as well, because run service will be used for when we have periodic auto saving, which is what I'll get to a little bit more in the bottom of the code. So now that we have our variables, we're going to do a little more of the module setup. So then inside of the profile module like script, we're going to have a index called player profiles. So profile module dot player profiles is going to equal to an empty table. And this is where we're going to store each of the profiles of our player. They're all going to go into this area right here. And then when we use profile service, we have to give it a name. And this is also going to be like the key we'll use when we want like peek into our data. And I'll link the like documentation for the data store service. Not data store, for Profile Store in the description, which also where you'll download it. So you'll be able to read more about it if you want to look at it. But we need to give it a data store name. So we'll say local data store name is going to equal to. Now, this is something that I learned from a tutorial video, by the way, a while ago when I was first like discovering Profile Service, is when you're testing data inside Roblox Studio, you want to create two different data stores, one for testing data in Studio and one for actual like players data, which will be for not testing in Studio. So when you are testing your data inside Studio, you don't accidentally mess up someone else's data that's from an actual real game. So I learned that you can, which is what run service will be used for as well, is checking run service is studio, is studio, and in this case it'll be called like test or player. So what this first portion would do is this would be like the conditional part. So if it is studio, then it'll set the variable to test, and if it's not, it'll set it to player, or in this case I could just say live, because that's what the example was when I learned this. So that way it'll be easier when we're testing in Studio with our data. Now, on top of that, we're going to want to make our default data that we want to use with profile service. So we'll say local player data template is going to equal to this table, and this is the default data that we're going to give to all new players when they join the game. Now, in day 1, we did leader stats. And this is what our data is pretty much going to look like here. We're going to have gems, XP, level, and stage. So we'll put that right here. So gems will equal to 0, and then what was it? XP, level, and stage. Well, actually, I think we just calculate the level based on XP. So we don't even need to include level here. It doesn't really matter. And then we'll give it the default values that I had prior. Or actually, we'll make it a tiny bit different so we could see it in action here. So this is our default data, and then you can always add other things in here, like tables like towers, inventory, like any other data that you want the player to have, including data for settings. Like if the player had enabled like low visual effects, right? All of that would go into the data template so that way the player can edit it later. Now we're going to create the actual player store. So we would just say local player store, like the data store, and then we're going to say profile store dot new, and then we're going to pass in the name, so the data store name, and then the template, which will be the player data template right here. And that's all we really need to pass for the player store. Now after that, we would work on the utility functions. So firstly, we're going to load our profile. So the function would be, what is it? Function profile module load profile, or whatever you want to call it. Load profile, get data, whatever, right? And then you send in the player that you want to load the data for. And profile store has this function called start session async, which is beginning the data retrieval and stuff. I think. I don't entirely remember. But what you usually do is you just say local profile is equal to player store start session async. And then we would send in the player's user ID as a string, which would be our key to access the player's data store. So some people I know like to do player and then underscore the user ID, but in this case, keeping it simple, we're just going to send in the player's user ID here. Let's type check it here. And then we'd also want to give it the, as you can see here, the parameters table. In this case, I won't talk about all the parameters, but we're gonna give it one called cancel, and that's going to equal to a function. And what this pretty much means is it's going to call this. It's gonna this function here will return true or false, set cancel to equal to, and this will run based on if the player's not in the game. So we would return player dot parent is not equal to players, and what this would mean is if it's not equal to players, it'll return true, and therefore it'll set cancel to true. If it is equal to players, it'll set false and cancel equal to false, and it would pretty much stop the session, which is what we want, because then if the player is not a member of players, it means they're not in the game. So some kind of error has occurred there, which is what this essentially is going to do. And then we're just going to check if profile, then we're going to say profile add user ID, and we're going to send in the player dot user ID here. This is for, if I remember correctly, something called GDPR compliance. It's something with Roblox's terms for if the player wants their data to be removed. I don't entirely remember, it's not at the top of my head right now, but it's, as a developer, you kind of have to acknowledge that if a player wants their data removed, they can have their data removed. So by connecting their user ID, we'll be able to remove their data based on whatever it's saved to their user ID. And then we're also going to run a function called reconcile. So profile reconcile, and what this will do is it'll fill in missing variables from the player data template if they're not there. So let's say we add another value in here called life or something, and then the player's data initially was created like this. Reconcile will add life to the player's default data. So it'll fill in any missing values that aren't there, but it'll be the default value, so it won't give the player any extra data that they don't initially have. And then from here we'll run the rest of the essentials, when the session has ended, and this will usually be when the player leaves or when the player disconnects. So player profile.onSession, and then we're going to connect that to a function. And then here, what's pretty much going to happen is their profile is equal nil. This is going to prevent memory leaks, and then we're going to kick the player in case anything happens where the session ends, like if the player disconnects or whatever. So we're going to just say self.player profiles, which is what we created up here, and then the player will equal to nil here. Now, as of right now, we haven't identified the player, like we haven't put the player in player profiles yet, but this is only when the session ends. So like a little bit after this is when we're going to set up the player profiles player, but this is only when the thing has ended, and then we're going to kick the player. So player :kick, and then say session ended or whatever, right? And then right below here, we're going to add in the self.player profiles player is going to equal to the profile. And then we can return the profile right here in case we do get the profile. That's all this function really needs to do. It's just loading the profile, and then it'll send it back in case it needs to. Now we're going to put an else in case we don't retrieve the profile. We're just going to kick the player again and say the data didn't load, and then we're going to return no because we don't have the data. We can't really do anything with it. And that's the loading profile part right here. It's really, really easy, and it's way better than Roblox data source. Now, moving on, we're going to get into something called releasing the profile. So, pretty much releasing the profile, it ends the session, and it saves all of the data that we currently have, which is literally what we want to do. It's how we can check when the player leaves the game and saving their data, and we can also use it for periodic data saving. So all we're going to do here is we're going to make another function. So function profile module :release profile, and then the player. I'm going to grab the profile, so local profile will equal to self.player profiles player, and then also I forgot to do something here. And we're going to check if profile, then if we have the profile, we're going to say profile :release, and then self.player profiles player will equal to no. And that's it. All it does is it'll end the session and it'll save the data, which is all we needed to do. Now we're going to move on to like retrieving the profile, which is a simple function separate from loading the profile, because when the profile will give you the profile, but we don't want to call the load profile function every time we want to retrieve the profile, because then you're going to load it every single time you want to retrieve it, and that's not good. So we're just going to make a quick function, profile module :get profile the player, and then return self.player profiles player, and that's it. And then finally we're going to have a function for the periodic saving. So function and then profile module :autosave, and then the interval which we want to autosave. So periodic autosaving, it's a really nice feature that you can use to ensure like data saving consistently, but it's something that you don't want to run too often. Like I would recommend like autosaving your data every minute or 2 minutes. You don't need to save every 10 seconds. That's going to be really, really inefficient, especially for large servers. And also since you're going to save data like when the player leaves the game, but it's important in case like any like data loss occurs or something like that, that we want this to be safely ran. So when this function is called, we're going to use task.spawn, so the code will run like in parallel or on the outside, so it won't like stop here. It'll like run in the background, right? And what we're going to do is we're going to put it in a loop. So while true do, and then we're going to wait the interval, and sometimes an interval isn't provided, so if there's no interval, we'll just wait 60 seconds if no interval is provided, and we're going to loop do all the profiles. So for underscore profile in self.player profiles do, and then we're just going to run pcall, which is short for protected call, and it will return an error if the this function doesn't run safely or properly, which is what you'd use for like Roblox's data store service. We're just going to run profile save. Now you can also just say local success error is equal to pcall function, and then we're just going to say if error then print failed to autosave data, and then we also like print out the error message in case we need to. Now those are the primary like assisted functions like enabling autosave, getting the profile, releasing the profile, and then loading the profile. But now we also have to get other functions like the player added setup. So connecting this to like setting up the player. And it's really easy. We just do player added and player moving. So player added connect function. The player that's added, we'll say self load profile player, and then player for moving connect function, and then the player is self release profile player. Oh, I think I have to change it to instead of self to profile because self isn't passed here. Though you could also do this in a different player added script. This part doesn't have to be inside of the profile module itself. And then we'll also, if you were to like control data in like one module, you would have like functions in here to like add certain items to the player's data. Now, usually I would have a separate module for controlling the data being added. This would be for saving the data, but I'll show you real quickly an example function for how you could have one dedicated to adding data. So I'll do it really quickly here. So function, and then profile module, and then it would be add gems, right? Let's say if you wanted a function to add gems to the data, we would pass in the player and then the amount to add in. Then we'd grab the profile. So local profile will equal to self get profile player, and then we'll say if profile, then we're going to add it. So profile dot data dot not points dot gems will plus equal to the amount. And in this case, when we run get profile, it returns the profile thing here, which it sets this as the data value, and then we're going to access the gems directly here. And that's all you're going to need for this part here. So now you can test it out here. So player added, we don't even need to do that. I can use it using a plugin called Data Store Editor, one of the best plugins out there. So we can now play test it here, see if everything works properly. And then if I go over to the Data Store Editor here, I just bring that down here. I love this plugin, by the way. It's such a great plugin. If you're a scripter, I would highly recommend this plugin. So, and then that's right. When you're using data stores, you have to enable allow studio requests. Where is it? Permissions. No, not permissions. Security. Enable studio access to API services. Forgot that needs to be enabled here. So anyway, so there's a server, enable this. Okay, I think there's definitely an issue going on here, so I'm gonna take this part out, and we'll go to the leader stats script here, and grab profile store, and we'll do that data stuff here, so we'll run the load profile here, so what am I doing? We'll just say profile store release profile. Wait, not profile store, my bad. It's profile module, and then we'll do that right here. So profile module load profile, and we'll also set that to this variable here. So local data equal to profile module load profile, and then we'll change the leader stats values. So actually first I'm just gonna make sure this works. There we go. Here we go. It's working out, and we have our profile here, which has all of the additional information, but the data is mainly the important part here. So alright, now we can move on to adjusting the leader stats data here to the data here. So gems dot value, it's going to equal to data dot gems. Make sure the naming is right here. And then XP is just going to be data dot XP, and then stage will be data dot stage. And then level will calculate based off the XP. So when the player is on, this will automatically save whatever data we have added. So what I can do now is I can give it a task.wait 5 seconds, and then we can go to the profile module add gems, and then we're going to put in 50. And then we also update the interface as well. So we would just say gems.value would plus equal 50, and then we would add 50 gems to the player. So let's go give that a try. And then I made another stupid mistake. this should be local profile, and then this should be profile dot data right here. Stupid me. Profile dot data. Wait, no, with the lowercase p right here. No, now it did it twice. Okay, and then now it should access it properly. So now if we hop in, there we go, 40 gems, 250 people, 225. Right now if I wait 50 seconds, it added the 40 gems to my account here, and now when we stop the game, now it's saying I'm just calling missing method release a table. Okay, yeah, that was the issue. The method isn't end, it's not release, it's end session. That's a mistake on my part, because release was part of the profile service, which was the predecessor to profile store. That's my bad. It's end session, not release. So now if I were to join the game, my 50 gems get added to the thing, and then so here's my user ID, and then it has my, if I look in the data starter, you put in test, which is the store, and then put in like list keys. This is my key. So here we go. You have the data right here. The main thing here where we have XP, we have gems, and we have our stage, which can be edited, by the way. If I click on it and double click it, I can edit it. So I can put my gems up to 400 if I wanted to, and then I'd reset it, and then I'd close it here, and then I would go back to the client and then leave the game, and then the player has left the game, so the data should save. Now if I go back in game, I think I'm actually doing this wrong, and then I know exactly why the gems weren't being added. It's because the add gems, I need to send in the player and then the amount of gems I need to add. That's exactly why it wasn't working. So now it's gonna add in the 50 gems, and then when I stop the game, it'll print out the data that I had to print, and then here now I have 90 gems. So now when I join the game again, I will have the 90 gems, which I gained from the previous. Now I have 140 gems, and then it'll save to my test place. So if I were to test it in Studio versus outside of Studio, it would be two different data stores to prevent data mixing up or corrupting or anything like that. And that's literally it. That's profile service. It's as simple as just making this tiny little module here, and you could, in theory, just like make one giant function. So instead of saying add gems, you could just say function like profile module colon add data, the data you want to add, and then you could get the profile, and then, or actually you could just say like the category and then the data, and then you could copy this right here, and then instead of saying this, you just say profile and then profile. So if profile and category and data, then you could just say profile and then category and then data. So in this case, if our category was gems, so profile category, we're going to, on second thought, maybe that wouldn't work. I don't know, you have to add like a really nice function for that, like adding data into inventory or whatever. But that's profile store. You know, it's really simple to utilize, and it's way better than using Roblox's default data store. And this leader stats thing, it's a really basic one. It's from day one on the 30-day scripting challenge. You can recreate it or just copy it from day one, but that's it for today's video. Hope people will use profile store because it's way better than data store service. And also, if you can get the data store editor plugin, this thing is really nice. I love this plugin. It's really good for adjusting corrupted data, viewing data, seeing if your data store works properly or not. And that's it. Yeah, thank you all so much for watching.